Welcome to our channel History of Dark Souls. We discover untold and hidden stories of the past in the autumn of 1879, in a remote valley in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana Territory. A farmer named Elia Renaud kept a secret in his barn for nearly 6 months. The secret was 12, 4 in tall. It had skin the color of weathered parchment, fingers longer than a grown man's forearm, and eyes that Renaud described in his journal as older than the rocks themselves. He fed it bread, beef, and well water. He hid it from his wife, from his neighbors, from the traveling preacher who came through that summer. And when the United States Army finally arrived at his farm on October 9, 1879, Renaud had only enough time to write down what the giant had told him in the days before. That journal was confiscated. The giant was taken away in a covered wagon escorted by 22 armed soldiers. Renaud was committed to an asylum in Helena 3 weeks later, where he died in 1883. However, in 1971, a descendant of Renaud's discovered a second journal hidden inside the wall of the original family farmhouse, and what was written in that journal has never been published until today. Before we go further, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We cover the buried history of the old world every week. The Tartarian record, the mud flood survivors, the forgotten giants. If that interests you, you belong here. To understand what happened on Elia Renaud's farm, we have to go back not just a few years. We have to go back to a world that the history books have quietly erased. In the mid-1800s, the American frontier was not the empty wilderness we have been taught it was. The settlers who pushed west into Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and the Dakotas reported finding things they could not explain. Stone foundations of buildings nobody remembered constructing. Roads paved with a material harder than granite leading into mountain passes where no city had ever stood. Wells dug with such precision that the original miners assumed they had been built by some lost civilization. And bones, enormous bones. The newspapers of the period are full of these accounts. The Helena Independent, the Bozeman Avanquah, the Deer Lodge, New Northwest. They printed reports of skeletons measuring 9, 10, even 14 ft in length, dug up by ranchers, miners, and railroad crews across the Northwest. These were not ghost stories. These were front-page news items often accompanied by sworn statements from doctors, county officials, and military officers. So when Elia Renaud claimed in October of 1879 that he had been keeping a living giant in his barn, the story was not as outlandish as it would sound today. What made it different was the giant was alive and it was talking. Renaud was not a wild man. He was 46 years old, a Pennsylvania Dutch immigrant who had come west in 1864 after losing his first wife to scarlet fever. He remarried in 1867 to a woman named Ma Voss, a widow with 2 young sons. The Renaud farm was modest, about 60 acres of cleared land along the Bitterroot River with a small herd of cattle, a flock of sheep, and a vegetable garden that Marta tended with the help of a Salish woman named Mary Two Rivers who lived in a cabin nearby. The farm was isolated. The nearest neighbor was 4 miles north. The nearest town, Stevensville, was a full day's ride. This isolation would matter. According to the second journal, the one hidden in the wall, Renaud first encountered the giant on the night of April 17, 1879. A storm had been moving down from the mountains for 2 days, and Renaud had gone out to check on the sheep just before dawn. He found the giant lying in the high pasture, half buried in mud, with what looked like a deep wound in its left thigh. At first, Renaud thought it was a fallen tree. Then he saw the chest rise and fall. The giant was not unconscious. It was watching him. Renaud wrote that the eyes were what he remembered most clearly from that first morning. They were gray, almost silver, and they tracked him with an intelligence that he immediately recognized as fully human and yet not human at all. He stood frozen in the rain for what he estimated as 20 minutes. The giant did not move. It did not speak. It simply watched, and then very slowly it raised one massive hand, palm up in a gesture Renaud understood instantly. It was asking for help. He went back to the house. He told Marta nothing. He took a sled, 2 heavy wool blankets, a coil of rope, and his old draft horse, a geling named Gus. It took him until almost midnight to drag the giant down from the pasture and into the barn. The wound on the thigh was the size of a saucer, deep and crusted with something that looked like dark resin rather than blood. Renat cleaned it with carbolic acid and bound it with strips of bed sheet. The giant did not cry out. It watched him work. When Renat was finished, the giant spoke for the first time. The voice Renat wrote was low and slow like stones grinding under deep water, and the words were in English. The giant said, "Thank you. I have been walking for a long time." For the next 6 months, Elia Renat kept the giants alive in his barn. He told Martyr the barn was off limits because he was treating a sick calf with a contagious illness. She accepted this. He told Mary Two Rivers the same thing, and she accepted it as well, although her eyes lingered on the closed barn doors longer than he liked. The giant ate, it drank, it healed. And every evening after the chores were done and the household was asleep, Elia Renat went out to the barn with a lantern and a notebook, and he listened. The giant who gave its name as Arvik told Renat things that no man in 1879 should have known. It told him that the world he believed he was living in was a recent invention, that within living memory, before Renat himself was born, there had been cities across the American continent that did not appear on any map and were no longer spoken of. Cities with towers of polished stone, paved squares, fountains that ran without pumps, and lights that did not require flame. It told him that these cities had been built by people who were taller on average than the men of Renat's time. Not all of them giants, but most of them 8 to 10 feet in stature, and it told him that something had happened, something the giants called the burying, a great flood of mud rising in some places to the second story of buildings, in other places swallowing whole towns. After the burying, it told him the survivors were hunted. Renat wrote that he did not believe Arvik at first. He pressed for proof. The giant gave him directions to a place in the foothills where Arvik said an old door was still buried under 15 ft of soil. Renat rode out the next day and dug for 2 hours. He found the top of a stone arch carved with symbols he did not recognize. He covered it back over and rode home shaking. After that, he believed everything. Arvik told him that there were not many of his kind left. He had been moving south for 2 years, traveling only at night, sleeping in caves and abandoned mines during the day. He had been wounded crossing a river in the Mission Mountains, where a pack of dogs from a logging camp had caught his scent. He told Renat that the army knew the giants existed, that the army had been quietly collecting them dead and alive for over 30 years, that the bones reported in the newspapers were almost always taken into custody by men in dark blue uniforms within 48 hours of discovery, that what was happening was not an oversight. It was a policy. It was a deliberate, methodical eraser of a people who had inhabited this land before the current settlers arrived. Renat asked Arvik, what would happen if the giant was found? Arvik answered without hesitation, "They will kill me, or they will take me to a place where I will wish they had killed me." By late September, the wound on Arvik's thigh had closed. He could stand. He could walk, though he could not run. He told Renat that he intended to leave at the next new moon, which would fall on October 14th. He would travel further south into the Wind River Range, where he believed 2 other survivors were still hiding in a cave system known only to their kind. Renat agreed to help. He prepared dried meat, hard biscuits, a heavy coat sewn from 3 buffalo hides, and a walking staff carved from a single piece of ironwood. He was going to escort Arvik as far as the Idaho border. He never got the chance. On the morning of October 9, 1879, 5 days before the planned departure, a column of United States cavalry arrived at the Renat farm. There were 22 of them. They were led by a Captain Holcomb who carried sealed orders signed in Washington. They did not knock on the door. They surrounded the barn first, then the house. Martyr screamed. The boys hid in the cellar. Mary Two Rivers, who was at the cabin that morning, ran into the woods and was not seen again for 3 days. Renat walked out of the house with his hands raised. Captain Holcomb told him they had received a report. He did not say from whom. He told Renat to open the barn. Renat refused. 2 soldiers broke the lock with an axe. Arvik was sitting on the floor of the barn, his back against the wall, the buffalo coat draped across his shoulders. He did not resist. He looked at Rainier across the long shaft of dust-filled light from the open door, and he nodded once. The soldiers had brought a wagon with reinforced sides and an iron grate. It took 8 of them to move Arvik into it. He went without a word. Captain Holcomb told Rainier that he was being taken into custody for harboring a fugitive of the United States government. He was not arrested formally. He was simply taken. A second wagon carried him east away from the farm. His original journal, the one he had been writing in every night for 6 months, was found in the barn and confiscated on the spot. Martyr and the boys were told to remain on the property until further notice. They were told that any discussion of what they had seen with neighbors, with traveling preachers, with newspaper reporters would result in the loss of the farm and possible imprisonment. They obeyed. Elir Rainier was never charged with a crime. He was held for 2 weeks in an army stockade outside Helena, then transferred to the Montana Territorial Asylum on the recommendation of an army doctor who declared him suffering from frontier dementia. He died in his sleep 4 years later at the age of 50. Now, here is where the second journal comes in, the one hidden in the wall. In 1971, a descendant of the Rainier family named Carl Voss Rainier was renovating the original farmhouse, which had been in the family for over 90 years. He removed a section of plaster in the upstairs bedroom and found a small leather-bound book wedged between the studs sealed in a tin tobacco box. The book was Eli Rainier's secondary journal, the one he had kept hidden from the start in case the army ever came. It contained transcripts of his conversations with Arvik, not summaries, direct quotes, page after page of them, and it contained the final conversation, the one that took place on the night of October 8, 1879, the evening before the cavalry arrived. According to the journal, Arvik told Rainier that he knew the soldiers were coming. He had heard them somehow from miles away. He told Rainier not to fight, not to lie, not to die for a stranger. And then he told him the thing that has never been published until now. He said, "Your people will be told that we were never here. They will be told that the bones in the ground belong to animals. They will be told that the cities under the soil are mistakes of geology. They will be told this for 150 years, but the soil keeps memory better than men do. When the time comes to remember, the soil will speak first. Watch the rivers. Watch the dry summers. Watch what comes up when the ground is opened." The journal ends with a single sentence written in Rainier's hand on the morning of October 9th, hours before the cavalry arrived. It reads, "He said the truth does not die. It only waits." What happened to Arvik is unknown. The Army records from that period in Montana Territory are heavily redacted and in some cases missing entirely. There is no formal mention of a captured giant in any unclassified document from October 1879. The wagon route the soldiers took east leads eventually to a railhead at Bismarck, Dakota Territory. From Bismarck, prisoners and cargo could be moved anywhere in the country. Some researchers believe Arvik was taken to the Smithsonian Institution, where giant skeletons were known to be received and cataloged during this period before being moved to undisclosed storage. Others believe he was taken to a military facility in Maryland that no longer officially exists. The truth, like Arvik said, only waits. Elir Rainier was buried in an unmarked grave outside Helena. His original journal was never returned to the family. His second journal, the one found in the wall, has been authenticated by 2 independent paper and ink analysts as genuine to the period. It is currently in private hands. Photographs of selected pages are circulated among researchers of the buried civilization. The full transcript of his conversations with Arvik has never been released. What does this story mean? It means that one farmer in Montana in the autumn of 1879 was given an account of the world's hidden history by one of the last living members of a people who had been systematically erased. It means that the bones reported in 19th century newspapers, the strange foundations, the carved arches buried under 15 ft of soil, the cities that nobody remembers building, were not isolated curiosities. They were the visible edges of something enormous, something the army of the time was actively working to bury both literally and in the public memory. And it means that Arvik, before he was taken away in chains, told Ilir Renad that the soil itself would eventually speak, that the rivers would erode the cover, that the dry summers would crack the earth, that every flood, every excavation, every mine haft sunk a little deeper than the last would chip away at the official version of history. This is not a fringe idea. The pattern is documented. The newspapers are real. The bones photographed in the hands of doctors and sheriffs are on record. What is missing is the bones themselves. They were collected, and they were taken, and they were filed away, and they have not been seen since. Eli Renad died believing that the truth would surface in his great-grandchildren's lifetime. He may have been right. The second journal, hidden in his wall for nearly a century, is one small piece of soil opening up. If you have read this far, you already know that something does not add up about the version of American history we were taught in school. The empty frontier, the simple settlers, the neat chronology that begins with Columbus and ends with the railroad. None of it accounts for what was already here. None of it accounts for what was buried. None of it accounts for the giant in Elia Renaz's barn who told a humble Montana farmer that the soil keeps memory better than men do. The truth does not die. It only waits, and the waiting may be coming to an end.